threat modeling, it's about thinking like an attacker. So it's a systematic and structured way to identify and mitigate security risks in your systems and in your application. So it's a way to try to understand what is happening in your application or in your system. But this is traditionally a very manual and labor-intensive process. It gets complex very fast, and it's also biased, of course, towards the one who is doing the modeling and trying to figure out what could happen in their environment. And for large and dynamic environments that are published 100 times a week, as Tom said, it gets overwhelming fairly quickly. And typically this modeling is also done on a very limited scope, for example, on a very isolated application. Of course, it's great to threat model your applications, but it doesn't take into account the rest of your environment and how they affect each other. And it also typically has a very limiting framework and also only looking at very specific types of threats. And it doesn't include the major risks such as new vulnerabilities and misconfigurations that you might do while deploying this application. But by using data from our environment, we can actually automate this process of threat modeling your applications and your systems and bring this as a self-service to DevOps teams. Foreseeti has developed a tool called SecureCAD, which is doing exactly this. So we generate a model of your environment. So we make like a digital twin of your environment based on data from that. We then simulate attacks on this model. So all of the analysis is done on the model itself because we don't want to do any harm, of course. So everything is done on this model. And we then use the attack simulations on this model to then find and prioritize and mitigate any weaknesses that we might find based on this attack simulation. And then based on these simulations, SecureCAD will then generate reports on your risk exposure, the threats and weaknesses that it might find in your environment, and also these critical attack paths. So the shortest path from the attacker's entry point to your high-value assets. And these critical attack paths will then expose the top threats and weaknesses, misconfigurations, and vulnerabilities that is allowing the attacker to succeed in compromising your high-value assets. And based on this, the SecureCAD will also suggest mitigations. So how, based on this path and the path the attacker is taking, how can we stop the attacker as soon as possible? What should we fix first to stop the attacker from succeeding? And again, all of these results, the attack paths and the mitigations and your risk exposure is also available through the APIs and SDKs. So you can build this into your pipeline, for example, and have it running automatically and continuously. Just to reiterate what you have seen. So we have taken data from our running environment and automatically generated a model from that. We have also taken data from third-party sources, such as vulnerability scanner like Detectify and Debrick, to find vulnerabilities and put them in the context of our environment, and then simulated attacks on our environment to see what we should fix first and put all of this into the context of our environment and how we can stop the attacker as soon as possible to lower our risk exposure.
Does the attack model use vulnerability scan results?
Yes. So the vulnerabilities we had from in this model are from vulnerability scanners. So it can either be scanners like Nexpose or Qualys or other types of services that finds vulnerabilities like Debrick and Detectify. So all types of vulnerability data can be used in the model and put in the context of your environment.
Second question that we've got is, in this example, you showed threat modeling at an infrastructure level. What about application threat modeling?
Yeah, so I mean, we took the AWS configuration to get our infrastructure and how everything is set up, but then with data from, like, say, Debrick and Detectify and other vulnerability scanners, we can also look at the application level and see how threats in actual applications can be used in our environment. So even if you have a vulnerability reported, it's not in the context of your environment. But here we put the vulnerabilities where they belong, so in your applications, in this infrastructure, and see how the attacker can use those to actually reach your high-value assets. So it's both the infrastructure, but also the application threat modeling part, because we look at vulnerabilities in the applications themselves and how they affect your environment as a whole.
The third question we have for you is a two-part question. If it's only for AWS, and how do you keep up with new services?
No, so this is not just for AWS. It's just it's a demo environment that we have running in AWS, but SecureCAD works for Azure and other cloud services, and also for your on-prem environments. So we can make models based on data from your on-prem environments as well. So it's not just AWS. It's basically for any type of domain. We have customers doing attack simulations on nuclear power plants and fighter jets and stuff like that as well. So any domain, basically. What was the second part? I forgot.
How to keep up with new services.
Yeah. So, of course, there are a lot of services in AWS and in Azure, and we are adding new ones all the time. We don't support everything out of the box, but we add services basically every week. And if you are missing a service, if you are trying out Vanguard, for example, and you are missing something, just tell us and we will add it as soon as we can. Yes.